be a part of the oceans and sky. When I was young, before my life, I was a part of the oceans and sky.
Beautiful thing. Gentlemen, may I ask a favor? Would you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Robbie.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you, John.
My name is Jim Morrison.
Jim, thank you.
Ray Manzarek.
Ray, let me start with you in a question, if I may. How do you characterize your music? Does it have a name?
Well, it's impossible, really, to put a label on it because of where we are in the music. Being on the inside, you're only of the music, and all categories have to come from the outside. So someone else is going to have to say what our music is rather than us, because we are our music.
Too much in it at the moment. Now, a lot of people seem to think you're from San Francisco. Is that true?
No, actually, we got together in L.A., but we play in San Francisco a lot.
That's the explanation of why you have that association. Why is so much happening in San Francisco? You figured it out yet?
The West is the best.
All right, fair enough. You sold many, many albums before you sold a single record. It's a phenomenal record success all around, the album and the single. How long did it take to make that first album?
About a month.
That's a relatively short time in this day and age, isn't it?
Yeah. We're in the middle of our second album now and trying to top the first one.
You told me, though, that it took you about a year to accumulate everything and put it all together. We leap up here. Future plans. Somebody mentioned you're going somewhere.
Yeah, we're going to go to England, and our new album should be out in about September.
Have you selected a name for the album yet, Jim?
I think it's going to Strange Days. I think these days, especially in the States, you have to be a politician or an assassin or something to really be a superstar. I'd like to do a song or a piece of music that's just a pure expression of joy.
Former Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek.
First time I saw him was on MTV. I was just completely blown away. Michael in a way reminded me of Jim Morrison. The Australian invasion had happened. They had the reptile, they had the serpent, they had the serpent power.
Welcome back to this Sheep Farm Meet the Flockers presentation from Brave New World Order series. This is episode 3, and we're calling this The Doors of Deception. In this episode, we're going to be looking into the 60s band and two of the band members of The Doors. The whole Dawes story, as like we've seen in this series so far, a kind of stage constructed event feel to it. And sadly, we've all fallen for the fairy tale many times over. So far, this Brave New World Order series has shown the clear connection between mind control operations and popular culture that also link back to the Huxley family and dark occultists, etc., etc. Before we start, I will apologise to all Dawes fans. The information you're about to hear in this presentation may, no, should change your mind about your favourite band and its band members. I'm not a Dawes fan, Christian's not a Dawes fan, but they became part of this Huxley Brave New World Order series because they were called after Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. Personally, I find their music quite depressing and boring and repetitive from the songs that I've heard, and I've tried listening to them as well. Have you, Chris?
I don't actually know any of the songs. All I can think of is the one from Lost Boys, People Are Strange When We're Strange, that one, and Walk On Through to the Other Side. Walk On Through. I can't actually name another one, actually. Do you know any of this?
Well, no, not really, but I have listened to some of the obscure ones,
Right.
and yeah, I just don't find them that talented, to be honest with you. They actually sound like they're off their head. Yeah, this is more about Morrison's bloodline or bloodlines and Ray Manzarek's intelligence connections.
Right.
So there is other stuff that we could go into, like a lot of this research that we've done, like in episode 1 when we did the link between the first Summer of Love and the second Summer of Love. There's something deeper there to look into because that's from our generation, isn't it, Chris? That would be the second Summer of Love would be a good one to look into for us. So things in this are popping out that you think, right, I could look into that a little bit deeper. And but I've got no real interest in their records or the music, as I've just said. So, thoughts, Chris? Were the Doors organic or a construct? This is pre-listening to all this stuff. You've not actually read through this part yet.
Well, I don't know. It's funny, isn't it, that Oliver Stone made a film about the Doors. He always said that Jim Morrison, I think he said, didn't he say Jim Morrison was like his JFK? Or I think it's something along those lines.
Right.
So he made the Doors film. I went to see that at the cinema, actually. I didn't really know anything about the Doors. I thought the film was not that interesting. Bad wigs. A lot of bad wigs in it. Fake facial hair. But I don't really know anything. The only thing I know about the Doors is that his dad was the admiral on, what is it? Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is where my...
a little bit of conspiratorial information I've got from
Dave McGowan's book, and that was where I started, really. And as we'll see, it goes a damn sight deeper than that. What Dave McGowan did there was scratch the surface and open up a whole world.
It looks very suspicious, because you don't... Like, if he was the famous rock star that you know, there's not that much footage of him singing, is there?
No.
I ain't seen much.
Or the Beatles. But even if you look for the Beatles, there's not that much for the Beatles proper footage either.
No.
From the second part of their lives, if you like.
Well, they stopped playing live, didn't they?
Let's not talk about the Beatles anyway. But Oliver Stone's an interesting character as well, isn't he?
Yeah, because he's done JFK. He did Nixon.
Yeah.
He did one about 9/11, didn't he? That's because I always thought he was like the conspiratorial director, and then he did one about, I think he did one about 9/11, if I'm right.
Yeah.
And that kind of not even on a conspiracy level. It was literally about the building or something. So you've got to question, haven't you? You've got to question his...
because his son's been coming out talking about certain things.
His son's a full-on... I mean, he's quite interested, his son. He talks quite well. But then he... Also, you've got to remember, thinking about it, Oliver Stone brought to the forefront the whole Vietnam thing, didn't he?
Yes.
It worked quite what it was. Platoon.
Yeah.
I mean, after that, there was a series of Vietnam films showing how it probably was, where, people didn't want to sign them, they got killed, and how horrible it was. There was like a string of them, weren't there, after that? Hamburger.
Dare I say a military documentary?
Well, also, was it, what I mean, they were on a psyop level, what were the reasoning wanting people to start ranting about the Vietnam War again?
Well, again, it's the same old trauma-based thing that generation will have experienced all that, won't they?
Yeah, but through the parents, that's their kids watching it, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
It's not that long after when you think. I think that film, I'm guessing late 80s. It's not that long after it ended, is it, really?
Oliver Stone's another one. His father was on active duty during France, which a lot of them were in World War II. And Oliver Stone also was in Vietnam in an elite unit with the 1st Cavalry Division, participating in long-range reconnaissance patrols, just to carry on the military theme, Chris.
And also, interestingly, I've seen him interviewed, and he says he was a rich kid, so he actually volunteered. He didn't get signed up. I've actually heard him say that. I mean, who the fucking hell would sign up for, unless you got dragged kicking and screaming?
Yeah. Some people do. Some people want to go in there. Some regret it. Some love it. But it's certainly interesting.
Charlie Sheen, I believe it is portraying him in Platoon, like the green rookie going to Vietnam. I think it's based on Oliver Stone's experience in Vietnam. And like we said as well before, I think he also directed Scarface, which, as everyone loves that film, although you watch it now and you're a bit older and you think, but
we mentioned that in the first episode, didn't we, Scarface?
Yeah. And like I said then, I've always thought that was a cocaine promotion film.
Two of the Doors members, if you remember, we mentioned, were among the students in the Ravi Shankar's Kinara School of Music in LA, and they were Bobby Krieger and John Densmore. Interesting, Ray Manzarek Jr., who we're going to go into detail in this presentation, met guitarist as a teenager Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore at a transcendental meditation lecture and recruited them for the band. John Densmore said there wouldn't be, if you remember from episode 2, there wouldn't be any Doors without the Maharishi. And we mentioned about the Twilight language and how hypnotic and throwing LSD and all the other stuff and the MK Ultra operations that were running with LSD. Is it any wonder that these kids, as they were then, turned into these band members? No, it isn't. Especially when you hear their backgrounds. I'm not saying all the band members, but certainly some of them. So Ray Manzarek Jr., and this really does follow on from Dave McGowan's work and Mark Devlin's work and concerns the Doors, or two of the band members in particular, Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek Jr. So before we get into Ray Manzarek Jr. and then Jim Morrison afterwards, I'm going to do a quick rundown of how and where the band came from. And there's a few, it's not an in-depth look, more of a bullet point assessment of the Doors and their origins. And there are a number of what I seem to see as discrepancies in stories, which can happen over time. You know, they do get agencies that write up their public relations and their bios and stuff like this, and over time they get tweaked and bits get forgotten. But there are some major discrepancies in the backgrounds. So the Doors were an American rock band formed in Los Angeles in 1965, with vocalist Jim Morrison, keyboardist Ray Manzarek, guitarist Robbie Krieger, and drummer John Densmore. The Doors began with a chance meeting. That's where I start having issues, Chris, that one.
Yeah.
Between acquaintances. So that in this part here where I pull this information from, they are saying that they knew each other, but yet still saying it was a chance meeting. If you know somebody, it's not a chance meeting, is it?
No.
It's not. It's not. You know, me and you, I can't come up and say to you, I've got this idea, Chris, and we, 2 years later we say, we had a chance meeting, me and my brother, and blah, blah. So, yeah, a chance meeting between acquaintances Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek on Venice Beach in July 1965. They recognised each other. Well, they would do, they were acquaintances, as they both attended the UCLA School of Theatre, Film and Television. It states on that fantastic encyclopedia, Wikipedia, that the Doors were among the most influential and controversial rock acts of the 1960s, partly due to Morrison's lyrics and voice, along with his erratic stage persona. Now, I mean, it might have been controversial back then.
What was controversial about it?
I don't know. I don't know what they did. They weren't like pulling the trolleys down and running around with the nads out, were they?
Not more controversial. Some Gary Boobs playing piano with Willie.
Yeah.
I mean, he did. When he sings, he kind of just talks, doesn't he? A lot of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't have said they were. I don't know how this seemed controversial though.
No, I don't either. Influential, yeah. That's what they were there for, in my opinion. They were there to influence people, their behaviour and stuff like that. Yeah. No doubt about that. And Morrison's lyrics, it's weird how the whole band, where I've read of this, Morrison didn't write all the lyrics.
Right, and I mean, if you were to ask me point blank, I would say, yeah, he was a poet and he wrote all the lyrics.
Yeah, I would have said the same. I'd have said, yeah, he couldn't play an instrument. He wrote all the lyrics, and they put
the
a bit
charisma.
like Elton John and Bernie Taupin. He came up with like hooks and things like that, and some of the words. But the make out is this messiah of writing. When I think a few of the band members wrote a few of the songs, big songs like My Fire and stuff like that. And I don't understand what his erratic stage persona. He were off his napper. He were a drug addict. He were an heroin addict.
But even that's dubious, isn't it? Surely.
Well, I don't know. Everything's dubious at the end of the day, innit? End of the day, they're going to a theatre at UCLA School of Theatre, Film and Television.
Yeah.
And, you know, as we're going to see, a lot of these people are actors. Yeah.
His story reminds me of the Elvis story, just done in a shorter period of time.
With longer hair.
But, you know, he was a rebel and blah, 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 and he was different and all this lot. And then he got addicted to drugs and booze, and then he just killed himself.
You would say
like
that
the Elvis story in a short period of time.
You would say he were one of the first rock and rollers, wasn't he? You know, that burnt hot and then fizzled out and died. You know what I mean?
Yeah, candle that burnt out. But like I said, Elvis is the same. And then you've got the same thing repeated with Amy Winehouse. But it's just what these pop singers do. They just get addicted to drugs and then just die.
Because they're so talented, they just explode.
Yeah. But you know yourself, and I'm sure most people know, you can't create anything off your tits.
No.
You like think. I mean, they've sold this this like image that you can get high and drink, and you know it can make you really creative. It can't. I don't think it can.
And artistic. It can make you artistic if you're off your napper.
I make sculptures and draw. I've seen some drawings when I've had a few shandies, and they look shite. They portray all these characters, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and they portray them like they were off the napper for 10 years, writing music and performing. And I don't know. I'm not convinced.
Well, again, we know that they've got these, and it's well-known fact that they've got these bands that work in these recording studios that, they do the music. The producer makes sure the song sounds good, and then they've got the pretty boys at the front who can play, but they're not as good as the studio guys. They're not as good as the producer, and that's it. The producer and the studio guys turd polish, don't they?
I would say that scenario has been fine-honed since then to now.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, too right, yeah. But when they make statements like, the group is widely regarded as an important figure of the era's counterculture,
as soon as they say important, your ears pick up, don't they?
Yeah.
Why is it important? Is it important to me, or are you telling me it's important?
Yeah, both. It's just another spell, innit? The Doors were one of the most successful bands during that time, and by 1972, the Doors had sold over 4 million albums. I mean, I don't know whether that's big numbers or not. Domestically, and 8 million singles. The band took its name, as we've said before, from Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, hence the name of this episode, The Doors of Deception. Or that's the story. There are a few stories of how the Doors were formed, and there's a few discrepancies in that story. Like, did you know they were part of a band called Rick and the Ravens? More on them in a minute. One story of how the band was formed was from the official I've got this from the official Manzarek.com website, and it says, it's July 1965, and Ray has graduated from UCLA. He's pondering what to do with the rest of his life, and decides to walk down Venice Beach from his apartment on Fraser Avenue and think about what to do next. This part was written as if Ray was saying it. It was 1965 and it was summer and school was finished. Now we had to do something. What are you going to do with your life? About 2 months later, sometime in July, sitting out on the beach here in Venice, who comes walking down the beach but Jim Morrison? I say, hey man, I thought you went to New York. I thought it was a chance meeting. He didn't even know him. He even knew he was going to New York. He says, no, man, I decided to stay here. I've been writing some songs and some poems and living up on Dennis Jacobs' rooftop. So I said to him, this is Manzarek, let me hear some of them songs. Can you sing one of them for me? So he sat down on the beach and said, okay, here's one I got, Moonlight Drive. So that's quite a big hit of the Doors, Moonlight Drive. And when I heard the first lines, let's swim to the moon, let's climb through the tide, penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide. I said, wow, that's it. We need to start a rock and roll band together. And he said, Ray, that's exactly what I had in mind. And I said to him, you can come live with Dorothy and I, must have been his girlfriend, at our apartment up on Fraser while we work on the songs.
Right.
So what are we going to do? What we're going to call the band? Jim says, The Doors.
Done. Now, it could be me being pessimistic here, but it sounds like a romance building exercise.
It does a bit. It does a bit. And this is on the Doors Wikipedia page. So again, I'm using the Wikipedia page on this one. It says under the section History and Origins, July 1965 to August 66. The Doors began with a chance meeting between two acquaintances, which was said, Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek, Venice Beach.
Who knew each other.
On Ray's Manzarek's Wikipedia page, it says, following his return to the United States, which is from the army, if you remember, he re-enrolled in the UCLA's graduate film program in 1962, where he received a Master of Fine Arts degree in cinematography in 1965. During this period, he met his future wife, Dorothy Fujikawa, and undergraduate film student Jim Morrison, acquaintance. Met him on Venice Beach. At the time, Manzarek was in a band called Rick and the Ravens. No mention of that. And with his brothers, Rick and Jim. So bear in mind, Rick and the Ravens started up while he was probably in the army, which we're going to come to, but yeah. On Jim Morrison's Wikipedia, it says, in the middle of 1965, after graduating with a bachelor's degree from UCLA Film School, Morrison led a bohemian lifestyle in Venice Beach, living on the rooftop of a building inhabited by his UCLA classmate Dennis Jacob. He wrote the lyrics of many of the early Doors songs that the Doors would later perform live and record on albums such as Moonlight Drive and Hello, I Love You. According to fellow UCLA student Ray Manzarek, he lived on canned beans and LSD for several months.
What, just like eating LSD?
Yeah. LSD on toast. Morrison and Manzarek were the first two members of the Doors, forming the group during the summer, or that summer. They had met months earlier as cinematography students. Hang on a minute. I thought they met on beach. Manzarek was impressed with Morrison's poetic lyrics, claiming that they were rock group material.
What, that one line you read him? You read him one line.
Read him one line.
Pretty good, though, to be fair to him.
Yeah. Although Morrison was known as the lyricist of the group, Krieger also, bear in mind, this is on Jim Morrison's Wikipedia page. So Morrison was known as the lyricist of the group. Krieger also made lyrical contributions, writing or co-writing. When they said writing, it means he wrote the song. Yeah, not co-wrote. He wrote the song.
Writing or co-writing.
Co-writing. Some of the group's biggest hits, including Light My Fire, Love Me Two Times, Love Her Madly, and Touch Me. Including, so there's more. Yeah? That's from there. Now, I also read that and I might have it further on, but Rick Manzarek actually said that he didn't think much to his poems.
Right.
And his songs. Which we heard with the Beatles stuff, didn't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if probably Doors fans have heard of Rick and the Ravens. I certainly hadn't heard of Rick and the Ravens. The Doors aren't a band I'd really listen to, so I'm not coming from it that I dislike them or like them. I'm coming from a point of interest. I haven't got a clouded vision of them. I've got no view on whether I like them or not. Anyway,
were those guys all a lot older than Jim Morrison?
No, they're all the same age, weren't they?
All the same age.
Roughly, yeah. In fact, the two guys that came on after Krieger and Dunsmore, I think they were younger. Rick and the Ravens, has anybody ever heard of them?
No.
It were an American surf rock and frat rock band founded in 1961. Rick and the Ravens was known as the forerunner to the Doors. Hang on a minute. I thought they met on the beach in Venice. According to Rick and the Ravens wiki page, the band initially consisted of Rick Manzarek on guitar, Jim Manzarek on organ and harmonica, Patrick Stonier on saxophone, Roland Biscoluz on bass, and Vince Thomas on drums. In 1962, Ray Manzarek, having moved to Los Angeles from Chicago, and presuming after he left the army, joined on vocals and occasional piano. We're going to cover Ray Manzarek's military background in more detail after this part, which is quite interesting. Rick and the Ravens performed on weekends for college crowds, mostly at UCLA Film School, and at a bar called Turkey Joint West on Santa Monica Boulevard, a British pub operated by the Santa Monica Soccer and Social Club. Their concert setlist consisted of their own original songs. Bear in mind, Jim Morrison hadn't written anything until 1965, and he wasn't even in the band here. Their own original songs, and mainly cover versions of blues standards. Rick and the Ravens also recorded 3 singles on Aura Records and a demo acetate containing 6 songs that were later re-recorded on Doors albums.
All right.
After getting out of the army in 1962, Ray Manzarek moved to Los Angeles and Chicago and joined the Rick and the Ravens, as I mentioned. Now, on the Rick and the Ravens page, it says, in an interview conducted by Rainer Modermann, who was the Doors biographer, a German biographer, Manzarek stated the first song Jim Morrison performed with Rick and the Ravens was Richard Berry's Louie Louie cover version. Morrison was not officially part of the band at the time. Manzarek simply invited his former colleague, bear in mind it's not his band, on stage, much to everybody's surprise. Oh, Jim, just come on stage. It's my brother's band, but you can come on stage. Morrison was reportedly not prepared for this. His first public performance, and he sang himself hoarse. Obviously knew what words, just like that, Chris. Yeah. Morrison and Manzarek had met previously and found they shared a lot of musical and artistic interests. Later, Manzarek asked Morrison to join the band, and he accepted.
Right, so you got 2 different stories.
Yes.
2 totally different stories.
Totally different stories. Totally different stories. In 1965, Rick and the Ravens demo features Jim Morrison on vocals, so jump forward now, Ray Manzarek on piano and background vocals, John Densmore on drums, Rick Manzarek on guitar and Jim Manzarek on harmonica, and Patricia Pat Hansen as well in the band. And Jim and Rick were disappointed by the response the demo received after attempting to promote it. And they, along with Sullivan, were additionally not impressed with Morrison's songs. I'll say that again. And they were additionally not impressed with Morrison's songs. Subsequently, Rick and Jim Manzarek quit the band, their own band. I don't know how to do that. They started it, but they're quitting. Stating they felt it was going nowhere fast.
Right. Bloody hell, gets weirder.
At Morrison's suggestion, the band changed its name to The Doors a month after they'd recorded the demo. Robbie Krieger joined on guitar in October 1965. At the time...
Jim basically went in there and took over the band, basically.
Well, him and Ray, by the sound of it.
But even the fact they were impressed by one line when he was on the beach, but then it was crap.
This has that old story of the Beatles and Monkees to it, to me. Like, they're like the Stones, the American Stones, Rolling Stones. And UCLA probably is a little bit like where Mick Jagger come from, London School of Economics he came out of.
Just the creative arm, if you like.
Yes.
Where it's films and music and photography, etc.
Yeah. It also sums up how deep, as we're going to come on when you hear Manzarek's story and see Jim's bloodlines and other information, how deep the MK operation run by Tavistock and intelligence services was in the post-World War II era on the whole music scene, not just in America, but over probably the world. And it was a constructed music scene leading up to and into the 60s and beyond. Like Chris mentioned, Elvis, he was probably one of the early ones to be constructed. The following is evidence that the hippie generation was a construct and that the planning was years in the making. At 3:30 a.m. on February 12, 1939, Raymond Daniel Manzarek was born. His father was Raymond Sr., who worked as a tool and die maker at the local International Harvester plant. His mother was Helen Colenda Manzarek. Ray and Ellen would be blessed with 2 more sons over the coming years, James and Richard. Ray and his brothers would be third-generation Americans, and his grandparents coming to America from Europe in the late 1800s. Graduating from St. Rita of Cascia High School in 1956, Manzarek went on to DePaul University in Chicago, where he played piano in his fraternity jazz band, the Beta Phi Mu Combo. On Manzarek.com, it says he graduated from the University College of Commerce with a degree in economics in June 8, 1960. On Wikipedia, it says in late 1961, there's a few discrepancies with dates, but I'm not going to hold that against them, and it's Wikipedia. Manzarek briefly enrolled at the University of California in Los Angeles to study law, so the Los Angeles School of Law. On Wikipedia, it says, unable to acclimatise to the curriculum, he transferred to the Department of Motion Pictures, Television and Radio as a graduate student before dropping out altogether after breaking up with a girlfriend. Now, on Manzarek.com, again, these are the discrepancies, Chris. After graduating from DePaul University in 1960, Manzarek enrolled in law school, which I just said, at UCLA. After a few weeks of classes, Ray knew he wasn't cut out to be a lawyer and decided to enlist in the military. We'll hear another story later on that contradicts this, of how he joined up in the military. Ray then served in Thailand, it says, on his own website, and he's passed away now, so somebody's running his website. He actually says Laos that we think he went to, and Okinawa, playing piano for his fellow troops wherever he could. And so the story seems, again, Chris, that there's differentiating stories on his official website and on Wikipedia, and on other blogs as well that I've read. Just different stories altogether. And so we'll move on and go into his military career. One thing is for sure, Ray Manzarek definitely joined the army in 1961. And he wasn't drafted, he volunteered. He joined of his own accord. And not only that, in his pre-Dawes era, future keyboard player Ray Manzarek Jr. was assigned to the highly selective Army Security Agency as a prospective intelligence analyst. I'll say that again. In 1961, Ray Manzarek Jr., keyboarder of the Doors, was assigned to the highly selective Army Security Agency as a prospective Army intelligence analyst. Does that start ringing any of your MK Ultra alarm bells, Chris?
I would say so, yeah.
The ASA, or Army Security Agency, was under operational control of the Director of National Security Agency, located at Fort Meade in Maryland. The director at that time, the director is the highest-ranking official of the NSA, which is a defence agency within the US Department of Defence. In 1960 to 1962, so the time when Manzarek would have gone in there, the director was Rear Admiral Lawrence Hugh Frost. Frost became director of the NSA in November 1960 with the rank of Vice Admiral. Now, I would hazard a guess that being Vice Admiral and Director of the NSA, one of the most powerful men in the US military, he would probably have known Jim Morrison's dad, Rear Admiral George Morrison. And he would probably have known Jim Morrison's great uncle as well. More on him in a bit. The fact that Manzarek was put into a highly selective Army Security Agency as a prospective intelligence analyst, as I said, has to set your MK Ultra alarm bells ringing. It has to. That alone, what I found out there in just having a quick skit around, set my alarm bells off. But ironically, this sheep farm listener sent some information in. They didn't know we were looking into this, and it's a link from a personal website of someone called Brit Leach, an American guy. His website is britleach.com. It's BRITLEACH.com, if you want to look it up. He wrote a blog called In the Army with Ray, I presume it was written around 2013, 2014, which he wrote as a tribute to Ray Manzarek Jr., who died in 2013. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put it on the screen now. Brit Leach says that he and Ray Manzarek Jr. joined the army together. Both were posted to Okinawa Island, Japan, in 1961 and 1962. In the blog, Brit writes that Ray told him he joined up because he wanted to study film and the art of the cinema. But Ray said he was conned into joining. Again, MK Ultra alarm bells are tingling. Manzarek says he'd had a few drinks in New York Times Square and just wandered into an army recruitment centre. The recruiting sergeant told him that the army would be a great place to study film by enlisting and requesting for an assignment to the Army Signal Corps, where they would give him a camera. So Ray Manzarek joined up there and then.
Right.
Ray was 22 years old and just got out of college or university. So we're talking 1961. That night is an interesting night, and I'd love to ask Ray Manzarek, but he's not with us anymore, who he went with, who were he out with. Did you think somebody spiked his drink? There's quite a lot of questions you could ask him there.
Well, and that story sounds like a romanticised version, or having a few drinks in New York and I just walked in. It sounds like one of them stories to me.
Yeah, got too drunk and signed up just as Vietnam War were kicking off.
Yeah.
And accidentally signed up into army. Yeah.
And why did he say he got conned as well?
Well, we're going to come to that. We're going to come to that. So if you remember, they said if he signed up to the Army Signal Corps, where they would give him a camera.
Right.
So what he thought he was signing up for, or this is what the story is, he was signing up to join a part of the army that would help him learn about film.
Right.
And technology of the time. No mention, though, that he wanted to play the keyboard. Apparently, the recruiting sergeant lied to him and didn't sign him up to the Army Signal Corps at all. Instead, Ray ended up on a Japanese island of Okinawa, on an army post called Tori Station, which is or was a big antenna field, where they used elephant cage antenna, which is a worldwide network known collectively as Iron Horse, which can locate high-frequency communications anywhere on Earth. Bit of a difference.
Yeah.
The AN /FLR-9 is a type of very large circular woolen Weber antenna array built at 8 locations during the Cold War for HF and DF direction finding and high-priority targets. Both Ray Manzarek and Brit Leach were cleared to go to this army base by the Army Security Agency. Where's your camera, Ray? They first met on the island and talked at the NCO club over a Johnny Walker whiskey or two. They told each other their sad stories. Ray said he'd been conned into joining up by the sergeant. Brit says that he himself had to sign a security clearance document that probably bound him to security for life. However, according to Brit, Ray wouldn't sign the security clearance. Rebel. Ray told him he wouldn't sign it because he had Polish ancestry. And in the 60s, Poland was a communist country, and by signing the security agreement, or the secrecy agreement, he wouldn't be able to visit Poland in the future, as it was an enemy territory. Brit says the army had spent tens of thousands of dollars in getting Ray that security clearance. The FBI, the CIA, the Army Security Agency, all of these agencies have been involved in making sure Raymond Manzarek from Chicago will be a good little soldier and not give our secrets to the enemy, particularly Poland. This is on this blog. This is written on this blog.
You don't have to be Inspector Clouseau to realise Manzarek's got possibly some Polish ancestry, do you?
No. But so the CIA have looked into him.
Yeah, and always worked it out.
I think they might have worked that bit out, don't you?
I worked it out by his name. I mean, you don't.
Yeah, and possibly they might have got him in the Army Security Agency for that very fact.
Yeah,
because you can go into Poland and be Polish.
Again.
Yeah, exactly. And now Ray wouldn't sign that security agency agreement or secrecy agreement, and it made the army very angry, Chris.
Right.
This is on his blog, this.
in 1960s America. I don't
In
think
the
an
army.
angry army would be quite as forgiving as
So
now.
what we've got to accept here is that in the army with Ray, in the 50s, 60s, they were forcing army personnel to have illicit drugs to see what it did to them. Yeah.
Without even being angry.
Without even being angry. Yeah. And he wouldn't sign the security clearance document while he's on Okinawa Island.
Just squeezed his knee and said, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine, don't worry. Well, just listen to this next bit. Does this sound plausible to you, Chris?
No, not at all.
I'm sure it doesn't to
It's a
anybody.
fairy tale. It's a fairy tale, isn't it?
Brit said in his blog, Ray didn't belong there either because Private First Class Raymond Manzarek did not look military. Any military, any time. This is how he's written it on this blog, so if it sounds odd when I'm reading it. He had very long blondish hair. Not rock and roll long, but long. So he's in the army. He's got long blondish hair, Chris. He had a moustache, a handlebar thing, that didn't speak of bicycles built for two or barbershop quartets, but rather of criminal motorcycle gangs or Cossacks. Now, bear in mind that and I'll stop it, but bear in mind, he's growing this type of look in 1961, Chris.
Yeah. So he's preparing for something, isn't he?
He's
preparing his character.
Yeah, he's preparing his character.
Because I'm pretty sure in them days, as soon as you joined up, you got your head shaved. Or you got a buzz cut, I would imagine.
Well, we talked of Oliver Stone. One of the things that were about the Marines, but one of the things that they did where they shaved all their hair off. And
then you think of Elvis when he joined up, that famous footage of him getting his head shaved.
Yeah. So, Ray Manzarek was wearing a defiant moustache, Brit says in his blog. Yet he was still on the island. So he wouldn't sign the secrecy thing, and he grew his hair long and grew handlebar moustache. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like he's either he's playing a part, or he's about to play a part, or he's high ranking and can do whatever hell he wants.
Yeah. They put Private First Class Raymond Manzarek in what was called the casual platoon at Torrey Station and talked to him frequently, heart to heart, trying to get him to change his mind. And it was while he was in that casual platoon that Ray grew his hair long and his moustache full and
right.
Cossack.
All right. It's all right for in casual platoon.
Yeah. So they put him, the very fact that they put him in a special platoon and talked to him and give him heart-to-hearts frequently, that sounds very army-like, doesn't it, in 1960s?
Do you think that Brett guy's, do you think he's just writing an honest blog?
Well, it's funny you should ask that question, Chris, because it turns out that Brit Leach was, or is still alive, an actor, a Hollywood actor. On the IMDb database, which is an acronym for Internet Movie Database, which was bought by Amazon and Jeff Bezos in 1998 for $55 million. Brit Leach on IMDb says in his bio, he's chubby and an engaging character, and he's a character actor. Brit Leach was born on the 18th of July, our mum's birthday, 1938, in Galveston, Alabama. Leach was often cast as a no-nonsense police officer, scruffy everyday blue-collar working class types, and crude hillbillies in both movies and TV shows alike. Leach graduated from Birmingham Southern College in the mid-60s. He attended Northwestern University for a short spell, but eventually dropped out and briefly, says here, worked in Army intelligence. Briefly.
Yeah, I smell a rat fire.
I'm smelling one already. I can hear that bell ringing, MK Ultra bell. On IMDb, I read that Leach, it says, shared an apartment with Ray Manzarek. Didn't mention that in his blog, but it says it on IMDb.
All right. Why wouldn't you mention that in your blog?
I don't know.
Well, he mentioned the army, but he never mentioned knowing him after the army.
Yeah, shared an apartment. Because you can't share an apartment in the army, can you?
No, you
otherwise you'd have mentioned that in the army.
We're in the army together, yeah.
He graduated from Macaulay School, a boys' preparatory school, in 1956. And it was founded as an all-boys school. Macaulay became a military school in the wake of World War I, with students wearing uniforms and practicing military drills. He went to a military school that students wore military uniforms, participating in military drills. Then he went into Army intelligence, and he shared an apartment with Manzarek. So, I just, when I was doing Manzarek stuff, I thought, I'm going to have to look into this Brit Leach character. And I wasn't expecting what I found. I should be now, but I wasn't expecting him to be an actor. I didn't expect anything. I just thought it was somebody who was in the army with Ray.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was legitimate, to be fair.
Yeah. Are you thinking that now?
No.
No, neither am I. So it went into Army Intelligence, and here's a list of films and TV shows from 1970 to 1991 when he retired.
I was just trying to find a picture of him, actually. Yeah.
I've got some pictures of him, but obviously you won't see them at this point. But Weird Science, The Great Outdoors, The Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, Bonanza, Tales from the Crypt, and New Art, The Waltons, Father of the Bride, Quantum Leap, Murder, She Wrote, L.A. Law, Sent Elsewhere, Fame, Dukes of Hazzard, Hill Street Blues, Dallas, MASH, Wonder Woman, The Love Boat, Happy Days, Mission Impossible, said Bonanza. So these are just...
That is literally every main American TV show of the 70s up to the 80s and maybe even into the 90s.
That was a snapshot. That wasn't all of them.
I don't recognise his face, though, to be fair. I'm looking at him.
No,
He's a character actor, isn't he? He's one of those background actors that just dibs in and out, I suppose.
But do these people have to be, Chris? Do these people have to be? If you're going to have somebody who's undercover, the best way to do it is somebody who's undercover. And I suppose.
Was his reward the fact that he kept working? Because character actors are often, struggling for work. He's clearly worked solidly since, actors, are always struggling for work. He's clearly worked solidly since the 50s, 60s, I reckon, though.
Yeah, and if you're watching this now, we'll be putting pictures up there showing this guy. You know what? Again, we could be wrong, but when you go through this work and you start seeing all these characters, part of military intelligence, the bits of story missing here and there, and then you find something else and all that, and you've got to ask the question: Is Brit Leach, interesting name, Leach, an Operation Mockingbird operative?
Well, there is also the chance that he was just in the military with them, and they've asked him to write that blog. That could be, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that could be.
Yeah.
There's a chance of that, isn't there?
But or it could be he's been in the military with him, and they've asked him to write that blog. He don't know who's asking him, and he's been used all his life, because a lot of these Operation Mockingbird people didn't know they were being used.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
I think on this island there were probably real characters, as in real army personnel, and then they were probably mingling. These people were finessing their characters and lying to people who they befriended.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Because that's what an intelligence agent would do, wouldn't they? So he might be writing something honest, thinking this is what this was about, not realising that it was a total setup, and this casual platoon, we didn't write any more about this casual platoon, was actually a platoon of infiltrators that we were going to use for various different tasks. And it sounds like possibly that this casual platoon that they talked to him frequently, art to art, trying to get him to change his mind, could have been some kind of MK Ultra, mind control, training, whatever, ops type of, on a remote island in Japan, on a listening base. Anyway, because he wouldn't sign this secrecy document, Manzarek was shipped out to Laos. Not Vietnam, Laos. The army wanted to help Ray change his mind on the matter of his security clearance. This is what he's writing again. There's a full blog. I haven't written the full blog out, but this is the full blog. And thought the jungles of Laos would be helpful in that regard and would concentrate his mind nicely. It didn't work, and Ray was released from the army after being in Laos for a short time. Brit also said Manzarek grew what he described as herbs in Laos. He then smuggled it back to the US after he got discharged. No explanation as to what the drug was, cannabis or poppy-stroke heroin, that he brought back into America. So he's writing to him back at the base. So let's just say this Brit guy is a real character and he's honest and he's writing what's happened. it sounds like they're sheep dipping somebody, this Ray Manzarek, and giving him, like you said, a persona, rechanging his style, if you like. That nonsense about him just getting drunk one day and walking into a recruitment place in New York just sounds like nonsense, doesn't it?
It's fairy tale.
Yeah. Apparently, pre-army, Ray had already enrolled in University of California in Los Angeles, and he apparently unable to acclimatise to the curriculum, so he transferred to the Department of Motion Pictures, Television and Radio as a graduate student before dropping out altogether. It was then that he enlisted in the Army Signal Corps as a camera operator, and he was instead assigned to the highly selective Army Security Agency. So he was already at university, California University, and he went to another university as well, which I'm probably going to go into his background a little bit deeper. And he'd been to university already, so he could acclimatise to the curriculum. He wanted to drop out, and that again, like we saw in episode 2, I think it was, where we showed that professor was recruiting people from sort of a small university for MK Ultra. This is what was happening in the 50s and 60s. People were getting recruited. And you imagine if you're told, this is what plans we've got for you, Ray. You're going to join a band, and you're going to be in one of the most famous bands in the world.
What, part of an army guy? Yeah. It's a secret operation.
Yeah. Ray told Brit he didn't like the army. And I'm not sure about this from my memory. If you were at college or university, I don't know if in the 1960s you couldn't be drafted. I don't think. You escaped the draft if you were at university.
Right.
I might be wrong there. This was in the US. So why did he drop out and go to a recruitment office if he was already in university? But anyway, I mean, maybe he wanted to go and fight. I don't know. But he didn't fight. He didn't want to go and fight. He wanted to be a camera operator. It sounds to me like if he did go to Laos, and that story about transporting herbs back, it's a really good mix with the hippie type thing that he became, innit? Following his return to the US, Manzarek enrolled again in UCLA's graduate film program in 1962, where he received a Master of Fine Arts degree in cinematography in 1965. So he'd also been at that university pre-going into the army, and he'd done a law graduate, and he dropped out of that as well, law graduate course. And so he's received a fine arts degree in cinematography in 1965. Now bear in mind, this is where he met Jim Morrison. Yeah? During this period, he met his future wife, an unknown undergraduate film student named Jim Morrison. In the blog piece, Brit says that, I don't know how Ray found the money to go to film school. I think I do, Brit, at UCLA. Where he met Dorothy Fujikawa, the love of his life, and Jim Morrison, and they came up with the Doors. And that itself is a story on its own, Chris. That's like, I invented this Microsoft in my garage story.
Yeah.
The story goes, right, that after the Doors finished, and I've got several different stories, so I'll probably go into this in anyway. This Ray Manzarek was on the beach in California, and Jim Morrison walked past him. And he said, I thought you'd gone back to wherever Jim Morrison came from. And he said, no, I decided to stay. I'm crashing at somebody's house. But I've wrote these songs. He said, well, sing me one of them. So he sang one of them, and it won at Famous Songs. And he said, oh, that's what we need to do, start a band up. I'll go into that in more detail.
How old are they at this point,
well, he was 22 in 1961 when this Ray Manzarek, so...
No, because anyone who's in a band, they've been playing an instrument since they were a teenager, surely.
Well, I think he has. I think he did play piano, and he was into jazz music and stuff like that, was Ray Manzarek. I think there's no doubt that some of these kids are into music, and some of them have played instruments. They're just not very good.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Doors, the one thing I do know about the Doors is they're famous for that organ, aren't they?
Yes, and he played that organ.
That would be him, yeah.
There's a few questions arise from this blog, but he could also be building in some sort of narrative. But I think that Ray Manzarek seems to have been acting while he was in the army. That's the bit that I get out of that. That he was sort of playing a part. What does Mark call them? Lifetime actors.
Well, it seems like almost like Secret Servicey kind of character. Undercover.
Yeah. Undercover type thing. But yeah. This on its own, to me, is an incredible story to believe and seems to be like some sort of CIA military sheep dipping exercises with MK Ultra thrown in all in one. But when we view the whole Dawes story, we begin to see a construct and an MK Ultra operation. And I keep calling them Manchurian candidates because I think we keep looking at Manchurian candidates as like assassins that physically kill people. But imagine a Manchurian candidate assassin that delivers music to change people's minds. And they're sent out to do these things like sleeper cells that we all adore and like and worship. And, you know, like a lot of these people that we talk about, Chris, in these episodes, you know, some of the people like the comic writers that you liked and actors and directors and musicians that you look at and you think, you know, they were my heroes, some of these people.
Yeah.
And now you view them totally differently. And
well, they've either got links or they're being used one way or the other.
And although not directly linked by blood, and I'll put a little caveat in there, although they could be, and I'm on about the Dawes here, to the Huxley family, there are connections to the Tavistock operations in the 60s that controlled the music industry. And these were written about in the Committee of 300 book by John Coleman and via people like Mark Williams, and I keep mentioning Mark Devlin's research and Dave McGowan's research, of which the Huxleys were involved directly and generationally. Mark Devlin covers this type of information in his trilogy of books, Musical Truths, Volume 1 to 3, and Mike Williams also covers it in his Beatles work, Paul is Dead research. Dave McGowan wrote about Morrison in his famous book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. It's the right title, that. McGowan told us that Morrison's father was, in fact, Rear Admiral George Stephen Morrison of the United States Navy. And it's interesting when you go on his Wikipedia page, he actually says that it sort of denounces the fact that he was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin, and the ship was this such and such ship, and that's the one that got attacked. But what they also say is that he couldn't have been involved because Rear Admiral George Morrison was running the whole operation with all the ships.
All right.
So it's even bigger than you think.
He's even more involved.
He's even more involved than not being involved because he wasn't controlling that ship that got attacked. He probably sent that ship to get pretendedly attacked. Admiral Morrison was the commander of the United States Naval Forces during the Gulf of Tonkin. So he was commander of the naval forces, not the ship.
The whole shenanigans, basically.
Yes, yes.
Isn't it funny enough, we've mentioned this before, fact that most wars are started with some kind of naval incident.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we all run it on naval law, aren't we, I suppose? Yeah. So
just odd,
even,
isn't it?
Yeah. That's
Talking
linked
about
to water. Even that Russian pipeline and the Caspian Sea was the first bit where
Falkland Islands
going into Crimea. Yeah, Falkland Islands. Yeah, everything. The Bismarck in World War II and Lusitania and all this other stuff.
According to Nick Collinson's book, World War One was something to do with Churchill on a boat going over and facing off against the German guy, peacekeeper of Europe.
Yeah.
All naval linked for some reason.
But interesting, the Gulf of it's all right. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was August 4th, 1964, less than a year before the Dawes formed. And there's a picture of Jim Morrison on the boat that his father were on, less than a year before they formed the Dawes with short hair, military-style haircut. Which, quite a famous picture from Dave McGowan's book, which sparked the escalation of the American involvement in Vietnam. And which is shown to have been an orchestrated false flag event. I don't think that's arguable now, is it?
I think it's even proven now. I think it's admitted, should I say.
Yeah. And Aldous Huxley was part of, or even possibly the leader of Tavistock, planning for the 60s revolution that the Doors took part in. And it's not, it can't be a coincidence that they called themselves after Aldous Huxley.
No, I think they actually openly admitted it. I think that was...
No, I know they admitted, but you've got Aldous Huxley, who was part of the start of this counterculture type thing via Tavistock, that started all these beat generation and all this other stuff.
You've literally got Jim Morrison promoting that book.
Yes.
Back promoting it, should you say?
Yeah. But there's also another interesting link, now for some quite left field, that brings us all the way back to the Aldous Huxley links again. Interestingly, Lee Harvey Oswald was also working at a Japanese base. In the late 50s, Oswald's training was in secret radar operations similar to Manzarek's, which required a security clearance. In May 1957, a document stated that Oswald was granted final clearance to handle classified material up to and including confidential, after a careful check of local records had disclosed no derogatory data. He was given the military occupational speciality of aviation electronics operator. In 1959, this is an interesting story, so I don't know if you've heard of this guy. I never heard of him, Chris. Oswald met future author Kerry Wendell Thornley, who was also in the Marine Corps. He is known as the co-founder, along with his childhood friend Greg Hill, of Discordianism, a kind of cult. Thornley was also known as Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, or Simp Lord Omar. Raised as a Mormon, Kerry Wendell Thornley shifted his ideological focus frequently in rivalry with any serious countercultural figures of the 1960s. I mean, that alone sounds like some kind of intelligence operation, like a counterculture operation.
Yeah.
Among the subjects he closely scrutinised throughout his life were atheism, anarchism, objectivism, neo-paganism, Krishna, Buddhism, and the mimetic inheritor of Discordianism. And, listen to this one, the Church of the Subgenius. Can you remember that, Chris?
No, go on. Sorry, run it by me.
Church of Subgenius is where that Bob character comes from.
Ah, right. Right.
Where they prayed to this salesman called Bob.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, but this guy sounds like he's going against the counterculture, right? But anyway, another story is that this is what interests me. Post-Marine Corps, Kerry Wendell Thornley attended Robert Lefebvre's Freedom School. Robert Lefebvre served as an officer in the Education Orientation Division of the Army Air Corps in 1945. Soon after World War II, he and his wife went on a cross-country lecture tour in a pilgrimage for world peace. Their peace tour was bankrolled by the Falcon Lair Foundation, a non-profit group interested in religion, philosophy and government, whose headquarters were at the Falcon Lair Mansion, Beverly Hills, California. The estate was built in 1925 by actor Rudolph Valentino, who named it Falcon Lair after his unproduced film The Hooded Falcon. Secret wires were found in the house and seances were held by spiritualists after Valentino had died. Doris Duke acquired the estate in the early 1950s, and I'll get back to this Thornley character and Lee Harvey Oswald. At the Falcon Lair, she bought the estate in the 1950s. At Falcon Lair, Duke befriended Sharon Tate, who was her neighbour in Benedict Canyon. Doris Duke was an American billionaire tobacco heiress, philanthropist, art collector, horticulturalist and socialite. She was often called the richest girl in the world. Duke was close friends with former First Lady Jane Kennedy Onassis. And in 1968, Duke created the Newport Restoration Foundation. Kennedy Onassis was appointed the vice president and championed the foundation. Back to Oswald and Thornley for a second, or Lord Omar. Both shared a common interest in society. culture, literature, and politics. They discussed George Orwell's famous novel, 1984, and Marxism. Oswald met Thornley in early 1959. He was then discharged from the Marines on September 11th, 1959. This is Oswald. Oswald then... Go on.
I was going to say, what, the lone crazy gunman?
Yeah, September 11th, Chris, 1959. Yeah. Oswald then travelled to the Soviet Union, because that's what you do. You just travelled there in the Cold War. You just travelled there.
Especially in the 60s, 50s.
And an ex-Marine. They just let him go, Chris.
Yeah.
You're an ex-Marine with secrets. There you go to Soviet Union.
Where you going? Yeah.
Just before he turned 20, which means you were 19, in October 1959.
Cram some stuff in for a 19-year-old.
Yeah, 19-year-old, yeah. Secret radar operative, and then he legs it to... yeah.
I mean, and when do Americans ever go to Russia, especially in them days? You know what I mean? Why would you... Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't need to, would you? But he studied Marxism, and George Orwell's 1984 decided to go.
19-year-old.
Kerry Thornley was known for the manuscript, The Idle Warriors, right? Well, this is where it gets a bit odd. Well, not odd, but this is where the MK Ultra stroke, CIA, intelligence, whatever, military, industrial establishment. So The Idle Warriors, which was based on the activities of his acquaintance, Lee Harvey Oswald. I'll say that again. Kerry Thornley was known for his manuscript, The Idle Warriors, which was based on the activities of his acquaintance, Lee Harvey Oswald, which he wrote in 1962.
Right.
Remember, this was before the 1963 assassination of JFK.
So, and he wrote a book about a 19-year-old guy he'd met 3 years before.
Yes. Yes.
What's the book about?
It's about him, about Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marines.
How weird.
It left me a bit speechless.
Well, I don't know what she's actually said there.
Yeah, I know. To summarise, let's just say this is an edit. I've edited this because we're an edition. This has got nothing to do with the Doors, but it's very similar to the Doors, right? And the story that guy wrote about Jim Manzarek, this guy wrote before he were in the Doors, and this guy's wrote this. Sorry. Anyway, so let's summarise. Here we have a supposed Manchurian candidate assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, and a future 60s cult leader, who's a counter cult leader, Kerry Wendell Thornley, who just by chance happened to be in the very same secret Marine listening team together in 1959 at MCAS El Toro in Santa Ana, California. Anyway, just on a side note, right, that very same Marine base, right, in California, the El Toro in Santa Ana, California, the El Toro Flying Bull patch, so that's their logo, was designed by Walt Disney Studios in 1944.
I mean, and the bull itself has got loads of connotations, hasn't it? Occult
connotations. Yeah, I'll put that picture up now. Thornley then writes a book, stroke manuscript, called The Idle Warriors in 1962, which has the historical distinction of being the only book written about Lee Harvey Oswald before the Kennedy assassination in 1963.
Would you reckon that they planned on using that book as some kind of, proof that he?
Well, I think you've just answered the question there, haven't you?
And maybe they didn't use it as much as they planned to, but it was just another little piece that they could have pulled out if they needed to.
Yeah. But because of his book, Thornley was called before the constructed Warren Commission whitewash.
All right.
So he was even questioned in there. The commission subpoenaed a copy of the manuscript, listen to this one, and stored and locked it in the National Archives, and the book remained there unpublished until 1991.
Right, bloody hell.
Why would they unpublish it? Why wouldn't they release it? Well, we know why.
I wonder what it's about.
In 1965, Thornley published another book titled Oswald, generally defending the Oswald lone nut assassin story in conclusion of the Warren Commission. Thornley was, according to Jim Garrison, in New Orleans at the same time as Oswald, even though Thornley lied that he was never in New Orleans. It sounds like some other type of controller. Later, Thornley even admitted that he himself had met CIA officer and future Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt in New Orleans, who told him of the rise of the 1960s counterculture and subsequent emergence of Charles Manson and what would become his cult. Tobacco billionairess Doris Duke. Duke also befriended Jackie Onassis Kennedy and placed her as vice president of Duke's Newport Restoration Foundation. And here's where it gets a little bit more cryptic, Chris. Doris Duke would rotate her residences during the year, staying at the Duke Farms and Rough Point during the summer, and then flying to Falkland on her birthday. Guess what date the friend of JFK's widow's Doris's birthday was, Chris? November 22nd. The very same day that JFK, C.S. Lewis and Aldous Huxley died.
Yeah, means something to someone, that does, doesn't it?
I mean, look at the characters within there. Sharon Tate, Jackie Onassis, Oswald, all the way back to Orwell, who we're going to cover in episode 4, by the way. That's another interesting story. Yeah, it's...
a lot of stuff happened in a very short amount of time there, didn't it?
Yeah, and then we have The Wizard of Oswald, an MK Ultra connection with Jack Ruby Slippers. The Doors' first album was called simply The Doors. He put a lot of thought into his songs, though, and meant poetic genius. It was released on January 4th, 1967. It was recorded in August 1966 at Sunset Sound Recorders, Hollywood, California, under the production of Paul A. Rothschild. Now, don't get excited. It's not A. Rothschild, as in the Rothschild's name. It's got an S missing. I'm not saying that means anything either. I haven't done any genealogy on this chap, but just that link there it tells me something. But
how many Rothschilds do you know?
Not many. Not many, Chris.
Except for that guy who used to work in chipping out there.
Yeah. Fish and chips with peas, please, Rothers. That album, that first album, at the beginning of this, you'll have seen a video when they were interviewed by, I forget what he's called now, it's called Clark. Anyway, he interviewed him and asked the question, how long did it take to record the first album? And the guitarist, I think it's Krieger, said 1 month. So the whole first album took 1 month.
Right. First album, so it's not like the Veterans, it's like the first album as well.
Yeah. The first album took a month to produce. Rothschild was a prominent American record producer in the 60s and 70s, widely known for his historic work with the Doors. He became a house producer for Jack Holtzman's Elektra Records label in 1964. By the mid-1960s, Rothschild was established in the Los Angeles music scene, and his house was on Lookout Mountain in Laurel Canyon.
Right.
And you remember Lookout Mountain, that's where the US Air Force military installation known as Lookout Mountain Air Force Station produced propaganda films and still photographs that Dave McGowan talked about in his book.
Yeah.
Beaming it out all over Hollywood for the United States Department of Defense and Atomic Energy Commission from 1947 to 1969. Just in time, Chris. Among those that have starred in Air Force films shot at, as they knew it as The Hill, as Lookout personnel called the studio, people like Bob Hope, Jimmy Stewart, James Garner, Gregory Peck, and Lee Marvin. Actor Jimmy Stewart was actually a brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve, and he narrated several propaganda films and starred in a series of public service announcements for the Civil Air Patrol. Paul A. Rothschild also produced the soundtrack of Oliver Stone's film The Doors. Initially, the Doors were signed to Columbia Records. They were put under a 6-month contract. But they asked for an early release after Columbia failed to secure a producer for the album and place them on a drop list. So Columbia were going to get rid of them. They signed him for a 6-month contract. Ray Manzarek, explaining the bass overdubs on some of the songs, said, we brought in an actual bass player, one of the Los Angeles Cats, Larry Knetchell, who played the same bass line that I played on Light My Fire. He doubled my bass line, he said. You see this
Played your
familiar
best, like.
story going, Chris? Yeah. Larry Ketchell, or Netchell, was an American keyboard player and bassist. That's what Manzarek did. Anyway, who was a member of the Wrecking Crew.
Right. Beatles, Mike Williams world.
Yes, yeah. And he worked on Simon and Garfunkel, Duane Eddy, Beach Boys, Mamas and Papas, Monkeys, Partridge Family,
So,
Billy Joel.
Everybody in Laurel Canyon, basically.
Everybody under the sun.
Right.
Everybody that was near Lookout Mountain.
Look out the Wrecking Crew here.
An interesting thing I saw.
Don't need to play your own instruments.
Yeah, you don't have to play your own instruments. We've got the Wrecking Crew in. Yeah. And one interesting thing was that the Electra, they invested in a 4-track tape machine that was used that cost approximately $10,000 at the time. And this was spent on a band that nobody had ever heard of in outside LA. I think they were going to be famous no matter what, weren't they? The Sunset Sound Recorders Complex was created by Walt Disney's director of recording, Tutti Kamata. Over 200 gold records have been produced at Sunset Sound, including hit albums for Elton John, Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, Toto, parts of Prince's Purple Rain, Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which is quite supposedly iconic album, innit? It meant to have changed music, that, along with Sgt. Pepper's on it. Elektra Records was an American label now owned by Warner Music Group, founded in 1950. Elektra played an important role in the development of contemporary folk and rock music between the 50s and 70s. The first album, The Doors, remains the band's best-selling studio album, with over 13 million copies as of 2015. I mentioned earlier a chap called Dennis Jacob, spelled Jakob, who Morrison met at UCLA in 1964. They were fast friends and eventually college roommates. Jacob is the guy who let Morrison sleep on his roof on the Venice Beach, where he were off his napper eating baked beans.
Right.
Writing songs, poetry. That many songs that he couldn't think of an album name. Jacob actually wrote a book about Jim Morrison, did Dennis Jacob. And the details some of the many experiences they had together just prior to and during Jim's early fame with the Doors, including several conversations between them which reveal many of Jim's early philosophies and attitudes. Included are several candid photos of Jim taken by the author. The book is called Summer with Morrison, The Early Life and Times of James Douglas Morrison, released on November 12th, 2015. Ironically, Dennis Jacob is a film editor known for Apocalypse Now, and he also was a film editor on the movie The Doors. Seems to be popular with these people, Chris. So we'll just have a quick flick through. I found some interesting stuff with Jim Morrison's death, and there are a few interesting facts that I hadn't heard about. Not that I'd looked into it massively, but I did know a little bit from reading McGowan's book and Mark's work. You watched the video, didn't you, of Ray Manzarek explaining?
Well, it was more of an interview, right. Where it was only a 10-minute one. It was just when we were looking at this, but I just found it curious and strange because he starts off, they're talking about his death basically, and he said, first of all, starts off saying he died under mysterious circumstances, and we'll never really get to the bottom of it. That were an odd thing to say at the beginning. And he also says the last time he saw him was when they were recording the last album, which was LA Women or LA Woman, I think. I'm not sure. And he said it was odd because that's the one that had Riders on the Storm in it. And he said that was the last song he ever heard him sing. But it was odd because he said he said, I'm going to go to Paris with his girlfriend, or meet his girlfriend there. But they hadn't finished. It was unfinished. The album was unfinished. Right. And he said it was unusual for Jim to do that because he'd usually stay around and finish and listen to the end. He said, but he didn't need to. So he agreed with him. Maybe he should go because, you're going off basically he was going off the rails when he was drinking and taking drugs. And he said he had loads of hanger-on friends. He said, you'd probably be a good idea to get the poet back and get the artist back and all this stuff.
And go to France. Discover yourself again.
Go to Paris, yeah. He weirdly said, though, it's strange that he didn't want to go to London. He'd have been better off going to London, which was unnecessary comment to put in there. And he said they'd finished the contract with Elektra. So once he'd done that album, they were free to do whatever they wanted.
Right.
So they could sign up again with Elektra, or they could move on to somewhere else, or just not do anything for a while. But he said it was a good idea to get away from bad company. One thing I did notice, that guy, and it's the only time I've heard him talking, he sounds like an actor.
Yeah.
He sounds like a radio presenter. He reminds me of, what's that guy with fuzzy hair called in America?
Stern.
He sounds like him.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like him. Quite weirdly.
I tell you what, I found in a couple of things, I heard him talk, he don't say, and Jim this and Jim that. When he were doing the Michael Hutchins thing, he always says, he reminded me of Jim Morrison, which I found a bit odd that
for his closest friend.
Yeah, I just said it reminds me of Jim or his nickname or whatever it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he didn't exist type of thing, like it were.
Especially when he's meant to be his closest friend.
Yeah.
Or like Jim Morrison's a character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not an actual friend or human being.
Yeah. You got some notes there that was assigned to Elektra Records as well.
No, that's what I just said. And the contract was up at the end of making LA Woman or LA Women, whatever it is. So then he decided to go to Paris, and he said, I might be gone for 6 months, might be gone for a few months, might be gone for a year. And then he didn't hear from him. And again, that little interview didn't kind of jive, because he said we didn't hear from him for ages. And then he said, then we got a phone call saying he'd love to, someone got a phone call saying he'd love to sing it live. I mean, considering his closest, probably his closest mate, he didn't really have that much contact with him. And he says, I'd love to sing it live. It'd be brilliant to sing it live. I'd love to do all them songs live and that. When I get back, when you're going to come back, oh, I'm not sure, etc. Anyway, then July 3rd, got a call. And he just says from this guy who was our manager, which I thought was odd. I think you found out who he was, didn't you? Got this call from this guy who was our manager saying Jim's dead. And then he brings up Paul McCartney, the rumours of Paul McCartney dying. And he said also it was a strange time, the Manson murders, the Kennedy assassination, the King murder. So he says it could have been a rumour, he said, because rumours happened all the time that Jim Morrison was dead. And he says, oh, there's quite a funny story. Once at a party, and someone said Jim had fallen out of a window, and then he turned up at the party. It just sounds like more
story building, narrative building.
Yeah, narrative building, yeah. But then the weird thing what he said, because he'd heard this, is his manager said, well, I'm going to go to Paris. So it's a rumour, but I'm going to go to Paris and see if he's dead or not. I mean, so he went, he said he was gone for three or 4 days later. He gets a call from this guy, he says, the manager. He didn't name him. And he said, we've just buried him. And he says, well, what? And also he didn't have any, not that he wouldn't have any emotion now because it's a long time after, but he didn't refer to having any emotion of him dying. Like, I was devastated, I was on my friend, the barber. He has nothing in his voice or even a reflection on any emotion. And he said, the manager guy says, we buried him. And he said, did you see him dead? And he said, no, it was a closed coffin. And he said, so you never saw him dead? And he said, no. And then he goes on saying, weirdly, we were like Apollo and Dionysus,
right? Which
is another Greek reference, Elektra Greek reference. And you said that in the end, the song he talks about the Oedipus complex, a Freudian thing of wanting to have relations with your parents or whatever, which can revert back to being fiddled with, I suppose.
Yes.
I don't know. That might be no connection. I mean, I'm not.
Well, I think a lot of this has the writings. I mean, we've covered Manzarek and his intelligence background. A lot of the other people seem to be either handlers of Morrison, or Morrison's background, as we're going to come into in a minute, shows that. And many accounts that he could also be inconsistent with his partners and displaying some dual personality facets as well. The Doors music producer recalls Jim was two very distinct and different people, a Jekyll and Hyde. When he was sober, he was Mr. Jekyll, the most balanced, friendly kind of guy. He was Mr. America. When he would start to drink, he'd be okay at first, then suddenly he would turn into a maniac, turning into Hyde.
Well, then there's people that do that. No?
There are. But when you look at all the background and all these musicians, how is it that all these musicians have to turn to drink and drugs? Why is it that, it's cool to be a rock star and off your napper? Why is it's sold? That's the rock star lifestyle. This is the era that sold that.
Well, so that there's no surprise when they die young, I suppose.
No.
And then someone's waiting behind them to collect all the royalties.
Exactly. Well, we're going to come to that in a second. We're interested in that as well, that part. Morrison spent the majority of his adult life in an open relationship with Pamela Curson, or Curson. At times, it was very charged and intense, apparently, and also described as on again, off again. Curson's father, Corky Curson, had been a Navy bombardier, attaining the rank of commander in the US Naval Reserve. Morrison's death, Curson stated that on July 3rd, 1971, she awoke to find Morrison dead in the bathtub of their apartment in Paris. One of Curson's most significant ongoing relationships was with the French nobleman and heroin dealer, Jean de Breteul. I like my French accent there, Chris.
Brilliant.
Apparently, Morrison hated heroin. Do you know, it's strange because if you'd have asked me about him, I'd have said he was an heroin addict. I didn't know he wasn't.
I thought he was. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying he wasn't, by the way. I don't know if he was, but he said he hated it anyway.
But it's another pattern, isn't it? That you hear that the drug addicts are, and then it turns out that, like the Jimi Hendrix story, that he was drunk, and it turns out he hadn't drunk anything, and he'd drowned on wine. Do you know stories like that?
Two different things.
Adds to the romance, doesn't it? The old.
And apparently, get angry at Curson for using. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as heart failure, although no autopsy was ever performed.
Yeah.
How does that work? How can you list that? How does that work?
I mean, it's probably happening now in recent years.
Yeah.
How do you have a And how do you know how do you have an heart attack?
Well, you don't know, do you?
No.
According to Morrison's will at the time, which I don't know if he had a will, but anyway, his will at the time.
No, everyone writes a will at 27-year-old.
Yeah, I know. Which stated he was an unmarried person. Curson was named as his heir, and therefore in line to inherit his entire fortune. Lawsuits against the estate would tie up her quest for inheritance for the next 2 years. On April 25th, 1974, Curson died of an heroin overdose on the living room couch in a Los Angeles apartment she shared with two male friends. Like Morrison, she was 27 years old when she died. The plaque...
All sounds a little bit convenient, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. The plaque reads Pamela Susan Morrison, 1946 to 1974, even though Morrison was never part of Curson's legal name. Several months after her death, her parents inherited her fortune. So nothing to do with Jim Morrison. All of a sudden, it's passed to her parents. Jim Morrison's parents later contested Curson's estate, leading to additional legal battles. Both parties agreed in 1979 to divide the earnings from Morrison's estate equally. Interestingly, heroin dealer to the stars, Jean de Breteul, was a young French aristocrat and a drug dealer and supplier to show business people like Morrison. So it is actually said that he supplied Jim Morrison with drugs. What, though, who knows? Keith Richards and Marianne Faithfull and the entertainment industry. Breteul was very close to the guitarist Keith Richards. His life is known mainly through the biography of Jim Morrison written by American journalist Stephen Davis in 2011. He was a member of the Le Tonnelier de Breteul family, son of Charles de Breteul. He inherited the title of Count. He began to sell heroin to major English and American musical groups, stopping off in Paris. He became the lover of Talitha Getty, actress and model of Dutch nationality, who also died in troubled circumstances in July 1971. At the time, she was the wife of John Paul Getty Jr.
Right.
On the 4th of October 1970 in Los Angeles, singer Janis Joplin died of an overdose in her hotel room after consuming pure heroin supplied by Breteul.
Right. He's like a fucking heroin serial killer.
Yeah. There are claims that he supplied the drug that accidentally killed Jim Morrison. Bear in mind, he's having an affair with Morrison's girlfriend, who's in line to inherit all the money.
What a bizarre set of shenanigans.
Yeah. 8 days before Brettiul's other lover, so Morrison died, right? 8 days before Brettiul's other lover, Talitha Getty, died on the 11th of July, 1971.
Bloody hell.
I mean, what's the odds of that? What are the odds of that? I mean, and if you throw in Janis Joplin, she died on October the 4th, you're talking of a 6-month period, roughly a 7-month period, or 10 months or whatever, where 3 people died who he was supplying drugs to.
As well. I think she was 27 as well.
Right.
If you're going down that old 27 club route.
Nearly a year after the death of Jim Morrison, Brettiul also died of an heroin overdose in Tangier, Morocco, aged 22.
It's a lot of death. I mean, I don't know. Is it all just dodgy heroin, or is it other?
Well, I don't know. There's a lot of people dying in the close proximity of.
There's a lot of money getting thrown around as well.
Yes. Interestingly, Brettiul belonged to, as I said, a distinguished family, the Brettiul family, a surviving French nobility family. Louis Charles Auguste Letellier, Baron de Brettiul, was the last chief minister of the Bourbon monarchy, appointed by King Louis XVI, only 100 hours before the storming of the Bastille.
French Revolution.
Yeah. So
proper aristocracy, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These are they were the real deal. So ironically, Morrison's girlfriend was set to inherit all his money. This Brettiul had spent most of his money on drugs.
Right.
So he'd wasted a lot of his inheritance away. And she was going to inherit the money from Morrison, who apparently he supplied drugs to, who they found dead in his bath, who they didn't bother having an autopsy on.
You've also got that old bath death thing.
Yeah. Maybe that's what the BAFTAs are.
Well, it's that esoteric. Is it the washing of the something or other? I don't know. I won't pretend I know. But it's got some deep meaning. The whole bath symbology. Yeah.
So now we're coming to this interesting part, the Morrison bloodline or bloodlines. And we come to, I think this is the real reason, in my opinion, why Morrison was chosen, going back to that French part.
And also, if I just quickly, who writes a will at 27, who's apparently a smackhead drunk off his napper?
Yeah.
When does he take time out just to nip down to a solicitor and write a will?
And also, if your girlfriend who you're on off with ends up inheriting your money without a will and all your family get nothing, and then she dies, why would that family of hers say, yeah, that's our money? I mean, obviously, one of them, you agreed, but
is this one of them points where they've done the shenanigans they're going to do? A bit like that Apple Corps argument, about. Do you remember all that about?
Yeah.
Is this where they're fighting the back? They are actually fighting because they're so egotistical and psychopathic. But is that actually going on? Is that an actual dispute? But they can't really admit what's really happened, but they're disputing over the finances.
Just to cover it up, a limited hangout. Well, we'll never know.
But... Well, I mean, they did whatever shenanigans were going to do, but then they were actually genuinely arguing over who gets his money.
Right.
That's what it sounds like to me. Anyway,
yeah,
who knows?
Don't know. This next part of the research, I have to say, is what makes, for me, this type of research interesting. It's what sends me down rabbit holes, this type of part. This information is the zeros and ones of the matrix. And what McGowan's fantastic work didn't cover, and I'm nowhere knocking McGowan, he was an inspiration to us and other researchers with his groundbreaking research. I suppose what we do, hopefully, is pick the ball up and take it to another place. And it's not a competitive thing. It's more, let's build on what Dave McGowan did. And he paved the way for research into people like Jim Morrison, who, as we shall see, has quite a bloodline of his own. The sources for my research here are genealogy websites like Gene and other websites, and family tree research, mainly done by independent genealogy researchers looking into the genealogy of famous people. As well as my own resources, I use 4 researchers in particular, Edman, Dr. Mark Humphreys from Dublin University, Leo van der Paa, who was a Dutch and Australian historian and genealogist, and Gary Boyd Roberts, an American genealogist researcher. So what I like about the work that these researchers do is that they probably did not know what they were uncovering, and that's in no way patronizing their work. But what they're coming from a totally different angle to what we come from, a totally different place. There's a certain innocence to their work, which means they're just looking, oh, he's related to, or she's related to, you know, which makes it even more trustworthy because they've got
conspiratorial.
It's not conspiratorial. They're not trying to prove something. It's totally
just saying, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And they have it double checked and peer reviewed and all this sort of stuff. Unknowingly, they're also uncovering the zeros and ones of the matrix, and they don't even know this because they're not going to put it all together and say, well, how come all these people are like that? Jim Morrison's bloodline, or should I say bloodlines, date back to at least 1000 AD. They're compiled of English, Scottish, French, German, Swiss, and Dutch DNA, possibly Scandinavian. Here are some of the bloodlines connected, coming up are some of the bloodlines connected to Jim Morrison. This part of the lineage comes from the father's maternal side, which we see a lot, don't we? It always generally comes from the maternal side. And one of the reasons why they're hard to follow is because they'll lose the name by the mother or the grandmother.
Yeah.
First, we have Jim Morrison's grandmother. Her maiden name was Caroline Hoover, spelled Hoover. And that was changed from the Swiss Huber, or Huber, which was Huber. One link I haven't checked, which could be a possible genetic relationship via the Hoover-Morrison link, is to the 31st President Herbert Hoover. Interestingly, President Hoover actually shares the same royal ancestor as Julian and Aldous Huxley via their mother's lineage via King Edward III. President Hoover's link is via Edward's son, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, English royal prince, military leader, statesman, and his third wife, Catherine Swynford, Duchess of Lancaster. And so Aldous Huxley shares a Hoover lineage.
Right.
No, sorry. He doesn't share a Hoover lineage. It shares the lineage back to King Edward III. And so does Hoover. Yeah. President Hoover also has a line going back to King John of England, 1199 to 1215. So if Morrison is related to this Hoover, President Hoover, then there is a possibility that he also shares the same royal ancestor, King Edward III, as Aldous Huxley, whose book he named the doors after. If I found that out, that would be a finishing touch to this research, to be honest with you. There is also the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover, who played a large part in 60s counterculture with COINTELPRO, which was a series of covert and illegal projects actively conducted by the FBI, aimed at surveilling and infiltrating and discrediting during all the uprisings and things like that in the 1960s. And it was a similar operation to a psychological warfare operation to Operation Chaos run by the CIA. Jim Morrison's grandmother, Caroline Hoover, her brother, Jim's great uncle, was another US admiral. And he was even further up the pecking order than Jim's dad. Admiral John Howard Hoover, US Chief of Staff in 1940, retired as a 4-star admiral and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery with his wife and given full military honours. I'll bet he knew Rear Admiral Lawrence Frost. If you remember, we mentioned this guy who served as the Director of Naval Intelligence and Director of the NSA. If you remember from earlier, he also headed up the ASA, also known as the US Army Security Agency, that Ray Manzarek was conned into joining.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's a small world, Chris. Weird. There's no mention of this relationship to Admiral Hoover on Jim Morrison's Wikipedia page.
Hmm.
Morrison's great grandfather was called Benjamin Franklin Hoover. Yeah. But following this Huber lineage, Huber, all the way back to Switzerland to circa 1132, we come to Baron Berholdus Huber, and I'll be showing this on, if you're watching it in the film version, I'll be showing you the genealogy page from this lineage, also known as Sefrea Ritter.
Right.
In 1222, in the Chlum district of Argau in Switzerland, Lord Burchard Dictus Huber, with an E on the end, was born. He was a direct descendant of Jim's grandmother, Caroline Hoover. He was born the son of Baron Bertholdus Huber, born circa 1185 in the Alsace, Champagne, Ardennes, Lorraine, France area. This family is probably descended from one Bertholdus Huber, aka Bar Huber, a younger son of a minor landed knight and baron in Switzerland.
Oh, Lizard King's got some lineage there.
Yes. In 1710, one Hans Huber and his wife Margaret arrived in America on the ship Mary Hope, which left London in June 29th, 1710, and arrived in Philadelphia on September 23rd, 1710. A memorial stone reads, Hans Huber, an early settler in Earl Township, west of New Holland, where he and his wife Margaret, Swiss Mennonites, took up 200 acres of land in AD 1717. It seems that Jim Morrison could be a distant descendant of the following individuals, but this needs a bit more research on my behalf. Henry II, Count of Nassau-Dillenburg, July 7th, 1414 to June 1451, who was the son of Engelbert I of Nassau and his wife Joanna van Pollenen. In 1442, Henry II succeeded his father as Count of Nassau-Dillenburg, jointly with his brother, Count John of Nassau-Siegen. Both descended from the Ottonian line of the House of Nassau. These are powerful lines of bloodlines. Jim's great-grandmother, the mother of Admiral John Hoover, was one Claudia Irene Crawford. She is a direct descendant related to the Scottish aristocracy via Clan Crawford or Crawford, Caufurd. Her ancestors built Orkinames Castle, Crawfordland Castle, Alban Castle, and Loudoun Castle.
Right.
A slightly different spelling to Loudoun Possessions, if you remember from the first episode.
Yeah.
the Huxley book Devils, the Huxley's book Devils, which was made into a film. There are several different spellings of Crawford. It's either spelled Crawford, 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 or Crewford. So a lot of these names change. The first Crawford is Galfridus Crawford, circa 1094. So all these are distant relatives of Morrison's ancestors. Then we have Reginald de Crawford, birthplace Crawford John, Lanarkshire, Scotland, circa 1115. In the 12th century, Reginald received extensive grants of land from King David I of Scotland. His immediate descendants adopted the name Crawford, then forming one of the largest baronies in Scotland. It's interesting when you see all these links, isn't it, Chris?
Well, it reminds you that in Frick Sprinbear said that they don't care about the names.
Mm.
That's why we're left. If you think about it, we've been told to worry about his names, haven't we, and his ancestry?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
We're not really interested in his ancestry, are we? We're just worrying about his last name, which means fuck all, really.
Yeah, it means nothing. Yeah.
We're actually tracing the bloodline is the thing. So we're left to worry about whether I've got your surname or your adopted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Hence all the double barrel names now.
Yeah. Oh, geez, don't even ask me about that.
Yeah. In 1127, Reginald beat back the enemies of King David I of Scotland at the ford of a stream in the old Roman road about 3 miles from Kilburnie. The king bestowed upon him the name and title of Earl of Crawford. Then we have Sir Reginald Crawford of Loudon.
And then maybe, I mean, this is a total grab, but that bit when he's on about he went to Paris, he should have gone to London.
Yeah. We'll never know, will we? I mean,
it's a grab, but you don't know. Well, I mean, was that secret talking? Was that
I don't know. The Twilight language.
Yeah.
But this Sir Reginald Crawford of Loudon, Loudon, born circa 1255, was the 4th sheriff of Ayrshire. Another is Sir Reginald Crawford, 1st Laird of Ockernames, born 1283. There are 11 lairds up to around 1700. Interestingly, one, Jane Crawford, was heiress of the Crosby estate. The name Crosby, spelled Crosbie, or Crosby, spelled Crosby, or Crossby, when you think about what the name probably means, set alarm bells going. The recently deceased David Van Cortlandt Crosby of the Byrds and supergroup Crosby, Stills and Nash, and occasionally Young. Neil Young was calling out all the unspeared, if you remember. Well, he also has Scottish ancestry, all the way back to his 18th great-grandparents, Annabella Drummond, 1350 to 1401, whose husband was King Robert III, real name John Stuart, grandson of Robert the Bruce, and father of James I, who was King of Scots from 1406 until his assassination in 1437. The House of Stuart, originally spelled Stuart with a W, was the Royal House of Scotland, England, and Ireland, and later Great Britain. This lineage comes from Crosby's grandmother, Julia Floyd Delafield, 1874 to 1952. What are the odds that two of the founding fathers of the drug-induced hippie rock 60s counterculture would emanate from similar Scottish bloodlines? The realization that Morrison and Crosby could actually share a common ancestor is astounding enough. Whether they were related or not is irrelevant. The fact that it is likely that their Scottish aristocratic forebears knew each other is beyond any random mathematic probability.
I immediately think of who is it as well when you're on about them. Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
I can't pretend I know anything about him, but I know he was militaristic. I'm pretty sure from a military background.
Well, they actually said, they said Frank Zappa didn't even like the hippies. He were more
he was
commercial and
he was literally pretty right wing, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was definitely some sort of military background because McGowan mentioned him in his book, didn't he?
Mm.
Back to Morrison. The surname of his grandmother, or his great-grandmother, Claudia, her name, Crawford, shows up in the barony of Crawford, adopted around 1125 to 35, when Norman knights who came with King David I, when he returned to Scotland to assume the throne and instituted Norman feudalism. So he came back from Scotland, King David, and the Crawfords came back with him. He came back from France, and the Crawfords came back with him.
Right.
King David, yeah. The early names of all principal Crawford families are all Norman, French.
Right.
However, some have asserted an Anglo-Danish ancestry. There is a tradition that Reginald Crawford, who was the son of the Earl of Richmond, was one of the Norman knights who were established by King David of Scotland. Sir William Crawford was knighted by James I of Scotland and fought with the Scots forces in the service of King Charles of France in the 1400s. Sir Hugh Crawford, 1195 to 1265, was the second Sheriff of Ayr and Chief of Clan Crawford and Lord of Loudun. Again, an interestingly similar name to the main character in the before-mentioned Aldous Huxley book, The Devils of Loudun, based on real events that took place in France, if you remember. The Devils of Loudun, which is a 1952 non-fiction novel by Aldous Huxley. It is historical narrative of supposed demonic possessions, religious fanaticism, sexual repression, and mass hysteria. Does that remind you of The Doors? Just that explanation there.
Sounds like my house.
Yeah, sounds like your house on a Saturday night. But yeah, it's given that Loudun in Ayrshire, Scotland, and Loudun in France are similar spelling and sounding, and that many French nobles ended up in Scotland, is just another sort of link in it.
Yeah. Just another weirdism.
The Loudun family married into the Crawford family. This is where it goes even madder. Hence the link. Jim's great-grandmother, Claudia Crawford, who is part of the bloodline of the Lairds of Ockinames, as I mentioned, and Sir Reginald Crawford, first Laird of Ockingham, born 1283, fought at Bannockburn with Robert the Bruce. Sir Reginald Crawford was appointed Sheriff of Ayr in 1296. Sir Reginald Crawford, who was the 5th Baron, Reginald Crawford, sister, Margaret Crawford, married Wallace of Eldersley, and she was the mother of Scottish patriot Sir William Wallace. You couldn't make this shit up if you wanted to, Chris, could you?
They always come into it, don't they? Robert the Bruce and William Wallace.
Yeah.
Not just this. I mean,
in many of the stuff that we've come across.
Yeah.
Captain Thomas Crawford, or Thomas Crawford of Jordan Hill, 1530 to 1603, was a trusted confidant of Henry Stuart, who was Lord Danley, husband of Mary Queen of Scots, and a retainer of Matthew Stuart, 4th Earl of Lennox, Darnley's father. Grandfather of the future King James. Captain Thomas Crawford became a member of the household of Henry Stuart and Mary Queen of Scots. Coincidentally, Jim Morrison has a relation called Robert Bruce Morrison.
Do you know, it makes me think, you know, when you think about the old Braveheart film, William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, I mean, another way, you've got all this history and all this lot, another way in modern day to keep everyone talking about those two characters on an energetic level is by making a film, and I think it won Oscars, didn't it? Braveheart. Is that what that film was really about? Was it about reselling?
To watch it back, wouldn't it?
It would be interesting to watch it back. Is it about reselling Robert the Bruce and William Wallace?
Well, I don't know.
But why? I mean, no one had ever heard of those characters till that film came out. Let's be honest. I mean, they had, but they hadn't. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They weren't. They got thrown as heroes, didn't they? Got thrown into the ether as heroes. Is that what that film was really about?
Well, again, it's Hollywood, isn't it? Who knows what that film was about?
I would, casting a spell, I would hazard a guess that's what it was really about, was reselling them names, so we all kept aware of them. Yeah.
There is actually the Crawford Baronetcy of Kilbrenny in southwest Scotland, and it's today held by Sir Robert James Crawford, Craufurd, 9th Baron, born 1937. And what do you know? But Captain Sir Quentin Crawford, same spelling, MBE, 6th Baronet, 1875 to 1957, so it'd be his grandfather, great-grandfather, founded the Fairy Investigation Society, or the Society for the Investigation of Fairies, devoted to collecting evidence and information about the existence of fairies, as well as to organise documented instances of fairy sightings.
It was a big thing then, wasn't it? There's that little girl who she famously contacted fairies, and they were all in the garden, but it turned out she just cut them out of books and stuck them on around a garden. Do you know when you mentioned Crawford, actually, by the way, I always think of Michael Crawford.
Right, yeah.
Who he played Phantom of the Opera famously, didn't he?
Well, he went from one extreme where he was just an absolute clown to playing something really serious.
Yeah. And it was quite bizarre, but but then when you think about that now,
that'd be interesting if he were related to Jim Morrison.
Like you said, he was playing a clown, but he was clearly put forward as an actor. He was in a Hollywood film as well. Do you remember?
Condor Man.
Condor Man. Shite.
Yeah.
So they tried to get him over to Hollywood for some reason, but he didn't really. Like a bad James Bond film, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well,
worst James Bond film, should I say?
Yeah. Well, the Fairy Society was founded in Great Britain by Captain Quinton and artist Bernard Slay. Other notable members included Walt Disney. Baron Captain Sir Quinton Crawford was also authorised by the Admiralty to create an experimental radio station to broadcast to the fleet of Chatham from HMS Andromeda, and this was the first wireless broadcast of music and speech for the purpose of entertainment in Britain.
Is that Chatham House as in Chatham House Rules?
Well, it's same spelling. Same spelling. Remember, Jim's dad, great uncle, were admirals as well.
Right.
In the 1920s, Sir Quinton Crawford began the experiment with wireless technology to contact the spirit world and became very well known in spiritualist circles. More Twilight language and fairy music.
Well, I'm going to say, where's the fairy phenomenon gone now? If it, was that an early version of the UFO phenomenon?
I don't know. Just interesting links to all this. and we're nearly coming to an end of this episode, actually. But the Crawfords are also, from what I found, seem to be either related via marriage into the Royal Stuart family, known as the last royal family of Britain, just like the before-mentioned David Crosby. However, this line of research also needs more work. The current Jacobite heir to the claims of the historical Stuart monarchs is Franz, Duke of Bavaria, of the House of Wittelsbach. If you remember, we also mentioned he was related to von Braun.
Right. Yeah. I don't remember that.
Yeah. He's a senior living member of the Royal Stuart family, descended in a legitimate male line from Robert II of Scotland. And there's also Arthur Stuart, 8th Earl Castle Stuart, the same lineage that David Crosby and Werner von Braun and many others have as well.
It's interesting, earlier on you mentioned Jimmy Stewart as well.
Yeah, I did mention James Stewart. Well, yeah. And he was a general, wasn't he? Yeah.
One thing that's ringing in my head when you're reading this out, is these actors like Jim Morrison, Jimmy Stewart, so you've got the bloodlines. Are these the underlining stragglers that, although to us they looked, the stars, and they looked upon as heroes and all this bullshit, are they actually the stragglers of these bloodlines, and that's why they're used to be the actors and the film stars and the pop stars and all this lot? That's what I would hazard.
Well, a lot of them come from illegitimate lines, don't they?
Yeah. Well, you've got to string them back to these people. They're not immediate.
They're not in the royal family, but they are linked in some way.
Yeah, which goes back to what we've said before, which is, are they like the bastard sons of the kings who, they still want them to do it, but even though they don't know, and which would open them up then to be zapped and MK Ultra.
Yeah, well, like Trudeau and like Blair and all these people, Johnson and Cameron and all these people that we've seen are all got these lineages back.
It reminds you of that vampiric world, doesn't it? With
it does, yeah.
The Klingerons who want to be vampires, but they're not. So
they're willing to do anything.
Anything. So I mean, I'm making this up, but you take Johnson's dad, Stanley. Is he one of them just clinging on, wanting to be part of that brotherhood?
Well, maybe he isn't,
bloodline.
But he knew his son was, and he's willing to sell his soul so his son gets
so he can be a full-on vampire. Yeah. I'm using the word vampire as
a euphemism.
But that's what it kind of stinks of when you're saying it, though. And I'm just making it up, but...
Yeah. The Huxleys are also married into the Bruce family, descended from Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland. Sir Andrew Huxley and Sir Julian Huxley's... Sir Andrew Huxley, who is Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley's half-brother, is a Bruce via his mother, Rosalind Bruce. His older brother was David Bruce Huxley, whose daughter also married into the Darwin family. She married George Pember Darwin, son of physicist Charles Galton Darwin, who was also married into the Galton family. Galton, who we're going to come on to in another part of the series, he invented eugenics. So, and he was a cousin of Darwin.
Right.
He invented the term eugenics and genetics.
And then you've got Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. Full circle. Also, this time on the Morrison side, he's also part of the Morrison clan, traditionally associated with the Isle of Lewis and Arris. There are numerous Scottish clans, both Highland and Lowland, which use the surname Morrison, either spelt with one R or two R's. The name Morrison is an Anglo-Norman, commonly found throughout England, Scotland, and Ireland. Now we know where Jim Morrison got the tag "the Lizard King" from. The story of the Dawes, with Jim Morrison's naval and royal bloodlines and Ray Manzarek's intelligence background, who apparently met accidentally and formed a band that were one of the most influential rock bands of the 1960s by accident. It's just the possibilities of all that happening and all this in the background.
And also we talked about the fact that in England, with the English invasion of America, you had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. In America, at the same time, you had the Monkees and the Doors.
Yeah,
which you can't not say that those are two very similar parallels.
No, and when you've got the same backing band, for the Monkeys and the Doors.
Playing for both of them.
and Rolling Stones and the Beatles.
Yeah. The only thing missing out of this conundrum is that Mick Jagger's not dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure looks it.
Yeah. You can't you can't make this shit up, can you? You don't need to.
You couldn't, could you? You couldn't make this up at all. The Doors apparently sold 34 million albums in the US alone and over 100 million worldwide, making them one of the biggest selling bands of all time. And all this happened with a chance meeting on a beach between Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek, California, in the mid-60s.
It's funny, isn't it? Just to go on a parallel if I was listening at work today. I generally listen to a bit of Curtis Mayfield, and we were on about this. Why is he not lauded up as one of these guys?
Yeah.
Why is he not lauded up? I mean,
because he ain't got that background.
Because he ain't got that background. And without bringing it into it, he's probably black.
Yeah,
part of it.
But he could. Well, I bet some of the black people though.
And he produced and wrote, and I think more now probably more now that these bloodlines have gone into different nationalities.
I would hazard a guess that some of these bloodlines, because a lot of black people obviously ended up as sons of slave owners, so they were like us.
What I'm saying, but that would probably come into fruition around now or 30 years ago. But then you talk about Curtis Mayfield, who died years ago, and he was quite old. I'm hazarding a guess here. I'm making this up. I haven't got a clue. But
don't get me researching something else.
No, but it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I was actually talking to someone at work about it today. I was saying, because it was an older fella, Curtis Mayfield. I'm like, the guy who produced and wrote music for Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight, and again, these people, although
they're the talent behind it, though. They're the talent.
But I mean, Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight, they're talented. They're still the big, but they're not lauded up like your Paul McCartney's and your fucking Rolling Stones or your Doors. They're not lauded up like that, are they?
No.
They're kind of forgotten about. They're kind of sidelined.
Yeah.
Even James Brown.
Yeah.
Sidelined compared to your Morrisons and your Paul McCartney's and whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not fucking right. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, sorry.
It's all right. Well, we've come to the end of episode 3. We're on episode 3. We've got another episode to do. Then I'm having a breather.
I think you only mentioned Huxley 3 times in that entire thing.
Well, this was more about the Doors, wasn't it?
No, I was joking.
Yeah. This third one is probably a bonus edition, an added edition, because it were too big to...
But it doesn't matter whether it's directly about the Huxleys, because it just keeps us talking and spanning it out about other stuff.
Well, it was certainly too interesting, the background of Morrison, after what McGowan pulled out about his father being an admiral in the Gulf of Tonkin, etc. But, I mean, that alone's interesting. But when you realise his great-uncle is even further up the ladder to his dad.
But even that... Oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
No, I'm going to say even that short interview I heard, and you listen to it now, and it just sounds like shenanigans from beginning to end. They probably didn't expect when he did that interview that someone would be looking at it like this.
No, my impressions of Manzarek was he seemed to be an actor.
Well, he sounds like an actor to me.
Yeah.
When I listened to that discussion, he sounded like an actor.
When I listened to the one where the guy asked him what do you think of what does he think of his own music? Yeah. When he goes into this long spiel about how he's of the music, he can't give an opinion of it, it was like
it's like he automatically goes into romanticism of everything he says. Yeah. And it draws you in, to be fair, if you weren't listening with different ears.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he's just romanticising everything he says.
Yeah. But again, I suppose we'll never know. We'll never know. But the fact is that these bloodlines are real. These bloodlines are his ancestors fought with the French royalty.
And I think it's
and the Scottish royalty.
I think it's good that you mentioned. I think it's good that you mentioned where you got those connections from, because I've actually even never asked you that.
All right,
Yeah, because they're not conspiratorial thinking.
Oh, not
because you find with people who are into genealogy, they're obsessive about it, and they just go into it and they dive into it, don't they?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's peer reviewed and all that stuff. So it's not like they're doing it to prove Jim Morrison's related to.
No, they don't care. No, they don't care.
Which is perfect. It's a perfect way to find it.
Yeah. I mean, the Jim Morrison side of it, I did myself, to be honest with you. It was more the other people like David Crosby and people like that, and the Margaret Thatcher stuff, and a lot of the Huxley genealogy that goes back through the Arnold family that goes up to Edward III. Edward III seems to be linked to a lot of this stuff. In the next episode, we'll be talking about George Orwell as well, and a few other authors, and a few other people that are connected from a bloodline perspective to the Huxleys. They worked in similar areas in science and academia, and are all linked in somewhere down the road. To the Enigma machine. That's what we're looking.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Benedict Cumberbatch film.
Yeah. And and so all these people are interesting stories in the next one. And it's an interesting set of research. This I am actually enjoying this. It's hard work, but I'm enjoying it. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Bye.